I'm Kathy, 32 female. I live in a loft apartment that overlooks the city, a place I bought with the first real profits from my sustainable fashion brand, Terra Threads. My life is a whirlwind of fabric swatches, ethical sourcing negotiations, and marketing meetings, but it's a life I built from scratch, with my own two hands and a decade of relentless work. I thought the hardest battles were behind me, the lean years of eating ramen, the investor pitches that went nowhere, the constant struggle to prove that conscious consumerism could be profitable. Then, a thick manila envelope arrived from my father, and I realized my hardest battle had just begun. It contained a bill for my entire childhood, and a demand for repayment that was so absurd, so malicious, it could only have come from him. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The envelope felt heavier than it should have. It was standard letter size, but thick, with my father's familiar, blocky handwriting scrawled across the front. No return address, but I didn't need one. I hadn't seen or heard from Frank in almost 3 years, not since the explosive fight at my college graduation, where he'd called my fashion degree a useless piece of paper, and told me I was wasting my life on a tree-hugging fantasy. I had politely informed him that my life was my own to waste and walked away. The silence that followed had been a balm, a quiet space where I could finally breathe and build my future without the constant, grinding weight of his disapproval. My company, Terra Threads, had recently been featured in a major business magazine. The article praised our innovative use of recycled materials and our transparent supply chain. It also mentioned our valuation after the latest round of funding, a number with a lot of zeros. I suspected this article was the catalyst for the letter. With Frank, everything always came back to money. I slit the envelope open with a palette knife I used for mixing dyes. Inside wasn't a letter, not in the traditional sense. It was a stack of papers, stapled together with a cover sheet that read, "Invoice, reimbursement for childariaring expenses." My breath caught in my throat. I flipped through the pages, my initial confusion curdling into a knot of disbelief in my stomach. It was a spreadsheet. A meticulously detailed, itemized list of every conceivable expense he had incurred raising me from birth until my 18th birthday. There were entries for hospital delivery fee, $2,500, diapers est 5,000 units at 25 cents unit, $1,250, and formula and baby food years 02, $3,600. He had charged me for every birthday cake, every Christmas present, every trip to the dentist. School supplies were broken down by year, with separate line items for crayons, protractors, and number 2 pencils. He'd even estimated my share of the mortgage payments for 18 years, my portion of the utility bills, and the grocery costs, calculated using a per-person average from old consumer spending reports. He'd added a column for annual inflation adjustment and another for parental labor and guidance, which he'd billed at a shockingly audacious rate of $25 per hour for an estimated 10 hours a week. The grand total, printed in bold at the bottom of the last page, was $529,481.72. A handwritten note was scrawled underneath. "Kathy, now that you're so successful, it's time you paid your debts. This is what you owe me for my investment in you. I expect the first installment of $50,000 within 30 days. We can discuss a payment plan for the rest. Dad." I stared at the number, my mind refusing to process it. At first, a hysterical laugh bubbled up from my chest. It was a joke. It had to be the most elaborate, twisted, and frankly, insane joke anyone had ever played. Frank had a cruel sense of humor, but this was a new level of deranged. I laughed until tears streamed down my face, the sheer audacity of it overwhelming me. I imagined showing it to my best friend Liam and us howling with laughter over a bottle of wine. "Can you believe this?" I'd say, wiping away tears. "He billed me for my own birth." But as the laughter subsided, a cold dread seeped in. I looked at the spreadsheet again. The detail was too precise, the tone too formal. The bank account number for the wire transfer, printed neatly at the bottom, was chillingly real. This wasn't a joke. He was serious. He saw my success not as something to be proud of, but as a resource to be tapped. He viewed his parental duties not as acts of love or responsibility, but as a financial investment for which he was now demanding a return. The memories came flooding back, sharp and unwelcome. The way he'd loaned me lunch money in high school and demanded it back with interest from my part-time job. The time he made pay for the window I accidentally broke with a baseball, docking my allowance for 2 years. His constant refrain, "Nothing in this life is free." I had always thought it was his harsh way of teaching me the value of a dollar. I never imagined he was keeping a running tab. My loft, which had felt like a symbol of my hard-won independence, suddenly felt cold and fragile. The city lights outside seemed to mock me. He wasn't proud of me. He was jealous. He saw my name in that magazine and didn't feel a father's pride. He felt the rage of a man who believed he'd been cheated out of his rightful share. The man who was supposed to be my protector was now my creditor. That investment he mentioned wasn't one of love, but of capital. I was no longer his daughter. I was a defaulted asset he had come to collect. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, leaving me breathless and shaking in the silent, empty room. The laughter was long gone, replaced by a cold, quiet anger that began to solidify in my heart. This wasn't just an invoice. It was a declaration of war, and I had no idea of the dark secrets that lay beneath his outrageous demand. The next morning, I walked into my office like a ghost. Liam, my head of marketing and the only person who knew the full, unvarnished story of my childhood, took one look at my face and steered me into my glass-walled office, closing the door behind us. He pushed a cup of coffee into my hands and said, "Okay, what did he do?" Liam had been my rock since we met in a business incubator program years ago. He was sharp, loyal, and had a finely tuned detector for my father-related distress. I slid the invoice across my polished concrete desk. Liam picked it up, his brow furrowed in confusion. He read the cover sheet, then flipped through the pages, his expression shifting from puzzlement to disbelief, and finally to pure, unadulterated rage. "Is this a joke?" he finally breathed, his knuckles white as he gripped the papers. "I thought so at first," I said, my voice hollow. I laughed, but he included his bank details, Liam. He's serious. He wants 50 grand by the end of the month. Liam sank into the chair opposite me, shaking his head slowly. "Of all the greedy, entitled, monstrous things, Kathy, this is insane. This isn't legally enforceable. It's not even rational. It's the ramblings of a bitter old man." "I know," I whispered, "but it feels violating, like he's trying to erase any possibility that he ever loved me, like my entire childhood was a transaction." He was right, of course. Legally, the document was worthless, but emotionally, it was devastating. It was a final, definitive statement on our relationship. Frank hadn't just raised a daughter, he had funded a project. Now that the project was a success, he wanted his payout. The parental labor and guidance line item was what truly broke me. How do you put a price on tucking your child into bed? On teaching them to ride a bike? For him, the price was $25 an hour. That afternoon, my stepmother, Susan, called. I almost didn't answer, but a morbid curiosity won out. Her voice was syrupy sweet, a tone she only used when she wanted something. "Kathy, honey, your father tells me he sent you a little letter. We're so proud of everything you've accomplished. Just incredible." "He sent me an invoice for $500,000, Susan," I said, my voice flat. "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she chirped, the faux sweetness already fraying. "It's just about being fair. We struggled for years to give you a good life. We went without so you could have things. Is it so wrong for your father to want a little something back now that you're rolling in it? Think of it as a thank you." "A $500,000 thank you," I shot back, my anger rising. "He billed me for diapers, Susan, diapers." "Well, they weren't free, were they?" she snapped, her voice turning hard. "Frank worked his fingers to the bone at that construction site for years. Broken bits of his body paid for your braces. Don't you dare act like you got a free ride. You owe him, you owe us." The us was telling. This had Susan's fingerprints all over it. She had always been obsessed with appearances, constantly complaining about their modest life in the suburbs. My success must be eating her alive. They probably sat at their little kitchen table, poring over that magazine article, their greed and resentment bubbling over until it solidified into this grotesque plan. They didn't see me, their daughter. They saw a winning lottery ticket. "I don't owe him anything," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "Parenting is a responsibility, not a business venture. Tell Frank to lose my number." I hung up before she could respond, my hand trembling. The conversation solidified it. This wasn't a misguided attempt to reconnect or a cry for help. It was a coordinated shakedown. They had convinced themselves they were entitled to a piece of my life's work. The sense of betrayal was suffocating. This was a man who was supposed to protect me, to love me unconditionally. Instead, he had tallied up my existence on a spreadsheet and found it wanting until it came with a hefty price tag. That night, sleep was impossible. I kept replaying conversations from my childhood, seeing them through this new, ugly lens. Money doesn't grow on trees, Kathy. Was that a lesson in fiscal responsibility, or was he logging another expense in his secret ledger? "You'll pay me back for this one day." Was that a joke about a broken lamp, or a literal promise he intended to keep? Every memory was now tainted, every act of fatherly care reframed as a down payment. The worst part was the insidious creep of doubt. Had I been ungrateful? Had I taken it all for granted? I thought back to the threadbare hand-me-downs I wore, the school trips I chose not to go on because I knew money was tight, the way I started working at 14 to buy my own clothes and save for college. I had never felt like I had a free ride. I felt like I'd been paying my way since I was a teenager. The invoice wasn't just an insult, it was a lie. It erased all of my own struggles, my own contributions. It painted me as a spoiled freeloader who had finally struck gold, and now the old prospector wanted his claim. By morning, the grief had hardened into something else. Resolve. They had drawn a line. They had set a price on our relationship. Fine. If they wanted to treat this like a business transaction, then I would too. And I was a much better businessperson than they could ever imagine. My first step was to treat the invoice as a hostile business proposal. That meant I needed a lawyer. Liam recommended a woman named Evelyn Reed, describing her as a shark in a designer suit. She specialized in high-stakes family law, but had started her career in forensic accounting. When I called her office, her assistant scheduled a consultation for the following afternoon. I walked into a high-rise office with panoramic views of the city that rivaled my own. Evelyn Reed was in her early 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of calm authority that instantly put me at ease. She didn't interrupt as I laid out the story, pushing the ridiculous invoice across her expansive mahogany desk. She examined the spreadsheet with the detached curiosity of a scientist studying a strange new specimen. "In 30 years of practicing law," she said, her voice a low, measured hum, "I have never seen anything quite this creative. It's a work of art in a sociopathic sort of way." She looked up at me. "Legally, Mr. Frank has no standing. Parental financial support is a legal obligation, not a loan. This document is a fantasy. You could throw it in the trash and ignore him." "I don't want to just ignore him," I said, the words coming out with more force than I intended. "I want to shut this down, permanently. He and my stepmother think they can bully me. They think I'm still that little girl who was afraid of him. I'm not." Evelyn nodded slowly, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Good, because ignoring a bully rarely works. They just escalate, so let's look at our options. We can send a cease and desist letter warning them of harassment charges if they continue. That's the standard play." "Is there anything more?" I asked. "Something that sends a clearer message?" "That depends," she said, leaning forward. "You mentioned he was always transactional, demanding you repay him for things, even as a child. This level of meticulous financial tracking, combined with this sudden, aggressive demand for money, it's a pattern. It suggests a long-standing belief that he is owed something. People with that mindset often feel justified in cutting corners or bending rules to get what they believe is theirs." Her words sent a chill down my spine. What do you mean? I mean, it might be worth doing a little due diligence on your own financial history, Evelyn said. Especially from the period when you were a minor. People like your father sometimes see their children not just as investments, but as assets they can leverage. The easiest way to do that is with a social security number that has no credit history attached to it. The idea was so repellent, so fundamentally wrong that my mind initially rejected it. My own father? Commit identity theft against his own child? It seemed impossible. Frank was greedy and emotionally stunted, but he wasn't a criminal. Was he? How would I even check that? I asked, my mouth dry. We start with a deep dive credit report, Evelyn explained. Not the free online version. We'll pull your full file from all 3 major bureaus, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. We're looking for ghosts. Old accounts you don't recognize, addresses you've never lived at, inquiries from lenders you've never heard of. Anything that seems out of place, especially from the years before you turned 18. She had her paralegal initiate the process right there in her office. Because of the potential for fraud, they were able to expedite the requests. The full files would be delivered to her secure server within 24 hours. I left her office feeling dizzy, the solid ground I'd been standing on now tilting precariously. The invoice was one thing, a manifestation of his emotional cruelty. But what Evelyn was suggesting was something else entirely. It was a federal crime. I spent the next day in a fog of anxiety. I tried to work, but the words on my screen blurred together. Every email notification made me jump. Liam tried to distract me with marketing projections and new fabric samples, but he could see I was a million miles away. The thought kept circling in my head, he wouldn't do that. He couldn't. The call from Evelyn came late the next afternoon. "Kathy," she said, her voice stripped of its earlier calm. It was tight, urgent. "Can you come to my office now? We've found something." The drive felt like an eternity. When I arrived, Evelyn led me straight into a conference room where printouts were spread across the table. She pointed to a section on one of the reports, a thick one from TransUnion. "Here," she said, "this is from 14 years ago. You were 16. I looked down. It was a credit card account from a bank I'd never heard of, First National Commerce Bank. The account was opened the month I turned 16. It had a credit limit of $10,000. For the next 2 years, it was used consistently. Small purchases at first, gas, groceries, hardware stores. Then the charges got bigger. A payment to a home improvement store for over $3,000. A charge from a discount furniture warehouse. The mailing address on the account wasn't my childhood home. It was a P.O. box in the next town over. The account was active for 2 years. Then, about 6 months before my 18th birthday, it was closed. The payment history was perfect, never a late fee. The balance was paid off in full right before it was shut down. To any cursory glance, it was the credit history of a responsible young adult, but I had never opened that account. I didn't even know how to apply for a credit card at 16. "He used it," I whispered, sinking into a chair. The room felt like it was spinning. "He opened a credit card in my name." "It appears so," Evelyn said, her voice gentle but firm. "He used your clean social security number, built up a decade of good credit for himself under your name, and then likely closed it before you were old enough to start checking your own credit. It's a classic case of familial identity theft. He borrowed your identity during a time he knew you wouldn't be using it." The invoice suddenly made a new, more sinister kind of sense. My father wasn't just billing me for my childhood. He was covering his tracks. He was preemptively justifying his past crimes by framing me as a debtor. If I owed him for my existence, then in his twisted mind, whatever he took from me was just a down payment. The ghost in my credit report wasn't a stranger. It had my father's face, and it was smiling. The discovery of the fraudulent credit card changed everything. The fight was no longer about a morally repugnant but legally toothless invoice. It was about a calculated, criminal act. The emotional betrayal I felt was now compounded by the cold, hard reality of a federal crime. Frank hadn't just been a bad father. He had been a thief who stole from his own daughter. Evelyn Reed shifted seamlessly from family law consultant to forensic investigator. "Okay," she said, her tone all business. "A 14-year-old credit card account is one thing, proving who opened it is another. We need a paper trail." Frank was smart. He used a P.O. box and closed the account before you turned 18. He was counting on this never being discovered. We need to find the original application. Our first step was to contact First National Commerce Bank. This presented an immediate challenge. A quick search revealed that the bank had been acquired by a larger financial conglomerate, Omnicorp Bank, nearly a decade ago. Records that old, from a defunct institution, were likely buried deep in a corporate archive, if they existed at all. Evelyn drafted a formal legal request, a subpoena duces tecum, demanding any and all records associated with my social security number, specifically citing the account number from the credit report. She included a signed affidavit from me stating that I was a minor at the time and the account was opened without my knowledge or consent. She warned me that it could be a long shot. "Big banks don't like to dig up old graves," she said. "They'll fight us on this, claiming it's an undue burden." While we waited for the bank's inevitable legal stonewalling, Evelyn suggested a parallel line of investigation. "Where did your father work back then?" she asked. "He was a construction foreman for a company called R. Ijwe and Sons," I replied. "He was with them for over 20 years. Was he the type to bring work home? Did he have a home office?" I thought back to the cluttered, dusty room in the basement. Yes, it was full of blueprints, binders, and old file cabinets. He called it his command center. When they moved out of that house a few years ago, he took everything with him. He's a pack rat. People who commit financial fraud, especially meticulous ones like your father seems to be, often keep records, Evelyn mused. They feel a sense of ownership over their schemes. It's a strange quirk of the criminal mind. They keep souvenirs. A copy of the application, old statements, it might be a long shot, but if he still has those files, the proof we need could be sitting in a box in his garage. The idea of getting into his house was daunting. I hadn't been there in years. But then I remembered something. My stepbrother, Susan's son from a previous marriage, was a decent guy named Mark. He was a few years younger than me and had always been caught in the middle. We weren't close, but we were friendly. He still went over to their house for Sunday dinner out of a sense of obligation. I called him, my heart pounding. I was vague, telling him I needed to retrieve some old childhood keepsakes that I thought might have been accidentally packed up when they moved. I specifically mentioned some photo albums and my grandmother's jewelry box. It was a partial lie, but it felt necessary. "Yeah, sure, Kath," he said, oblivious. "I'm going over this weekend. I can take a look in the attic for you. Mom's always complaining about all the junk up there." "Actually," I said, improvising, "I think they might be in the file cabinets in the garage. Dad was always so weird about those. Could you possibly snap a few photos of the cabinet labels for me, just so I can tell you which one to look in?" It was a risky request, but Mark was easygoing. "No problem," he said. "I'll do it while they're watching their shows after dinner." 3 days later, just as Omnicorp Bank's legal team sent Evelyn a formal letter refusing our request on the grounds of archival difficulty, my phone buzzed with a text from Mark. It was a series of blurry photos of old, beige filing cabinets in a dimly lit garage. I zoomed in on the labels, handwritten in my father's blocky script. Most were what I expected. Taxes 1992,000, household receipts, appliance manuals. But then I saw it, on the bottom drawer of the third cabinet, a single chilling word, KATHY. My blood ran cold. Why would he have a file drawer dedicated to me filled with old financial documents? I sent the picture to Evelyn. Her reply was immediate. "That's our target." Now we had a new, even more difficult problem. How to get inside that drawer without a search warrant, which we couldn't get without more concrete evidence. It was a classic catch-22. The breakthrough came from an unexpected place. Evelyn's paralegal, a young, tech-savvy woman, had been doing deep-dive public records searches on my father. She found something interesting. A few years after the fraudulent credit card was closed, Frank had refinanced their home. On the application, he'd used First National Commerce Bank, the same bank that issued the card, as one of his primary financial references. "This is huge," Evelyn explained, pacing her office. "He listed them on an official loan document. This connects him directly to the bank at the right time. But more importantly, it means there's another set of records out there: the mortgage company." The mortgage company from that refinance had also been bought and sold twice, but their records were more recent and subject to stricter retention laws. Evelyn filed another, more targeted subpoena. This time, we weren't just fishing. We were asking for a specific document: the credit reference check from Frank's refinance application, provided by First National Commerce Bank. Weeks turned into a month. My father and Susan left angry voicemails demanding payment on their invoice. I ignored them, my focus entirely on the legal battle. Finally, a certified package arrived at Evelyn's office. Inside was a treasure trove. The mortgage company had digitized their old files. There it was, a copy of the credit reference they had received. It listed the accounts Frank held with the bank. It showed his mortgage, his checking account, and a credit card. The credit card number on the reference matched the number on my credit report, but the name on the reference wasn't mine. It was his. "He lied," Evelyn said, a grim triumph in her voice. "To the bank that issued the card, he must have presented it as his own account, maybe claiming I was an authorized user. But he applied for it using my social security number. We now have an official document linking him to that specific account number. This is the piece of evidence we needed." We now had the what, the when, and the how. We had the ghost account, and we had Frank's fingerprints all over it. The crime he had buried for 14 years was finally seeing the light of day. And in his garage, in a file drawer labeled with my name, I was certain we would find the rest of the puzzle. With the evidence from the mortgage refinance in hand, Evelyn explained that we had reached a critical juncture. We had enough proof to file a police report for identity theft and fraud. The authorities could then obtain a search warrant for Frank's house and seize the contents of that filing cabinet. However, she laid out another option. "The criminal justice route can be long, messy, and emotionally draining," she said, her expression serious. "It may not result in the outcome you want. Juries can be unpredictable, and prosecutors have heavy caseloads. There is another way, a more direct approach. We can use this evidence not as a sword for the state, but as a shield for you. We can confront him privately." The idea appealed to me instantly. This was never about seeing my father in jail. I didn't want revenge in the traditional sense. I wanted justice, and more than that, I wanted liberation. I wanted to sever the toxic financial and emotional ties he had tried to wrap around me for my entire life. I wanted him to know that I knew and that I was no longer powerless. "We will treat his invoice as a legitimate business inquiry," Evelyn said, a strategic glint in her eye. "And we will respond in kind. We are going to prepare a counter-invoice. We will audit his fraudulent account, calculate the damages, and present him with a bill of our own." For the next week, Evelyn and I worked with a forensic accountant she had on retainer. It was a surreal and deeply unsettling process. We went through the credit card statements that we now had thanks to the subpoena. The bank had finally coughed them up after Evelyn threatened them with legal action for failing to protect a minor's identity. We analyzed every single charge Frank had made using my stolen identity. He had used the $10,000 credit line as his personal slush fund for 2 years. There were charges for expensive tools from a hardware superstore, a new set of tires for his truck, and several payments to a local bar he used to frequent. The largest single item was a down payment on a new fishing boat, a luxury I knew my stepmother Susan had bitterly opposed at the time. He had financed his hobbies and lifestyle on the back of my future credit. The accountant calculated the total amount spent, $27,843. Then, he began to calculate the damages. This was where Evelyn's brilliance truly shone. "First," she instructed, "we calculate the interest. He essentially gave himself an interest-free loan for 2 years. We will calculate the interest he should have paid on that balance at the standard credit card rate from that time, compounded monthly. That adds another $11,450. Next, she continued, we bill for damages to my creditworthiness. While he paid it off, the existence of the account and the high utilization rate could have negatively impacted my ability to get student loans or other credit later on. We'll assign a standard penalty for that. Then came the masterstroke. He billed you for parental labor and guidance at $25 an hour, Evelyn said with a wry smile. It seems only fair that we bill him for identity and credit management services. For the 2 years, he was using your social security number without authorization. What do you think is a fair market rate for managing a secret credit line for a demanding client, Kathy? A real, genuine smile spread across my face for the first time in weeks. I think my company's standard consulting fee of $300 per hour would be appropriate, I said. The accountant punched the numbers into his spreadsheet. We estimated a conservative 5 hours per week of management, which included the risk, the liability, and the mental burden. The total for services rendered came to an astonishing $156,000. Finally, we added line items for legal fees, accounting fees, and a substantial fee for emotional distress and breach of fiduciary parental duty. The final number on our counter invoice was a staggering $248,693.18. It was less than half of what he demanded from me, but unlike his bill, ours was based on a real, provable crime. Evelyn's team drafted the document. It was a work of art, mirroring the format of Frank's original invoice perfectly. It had a professional letterhead from Evelyn's law firm. It listed each charge, each calculated interest payment, and each penalty with cold, irrefutable detail. Appended to the back were copies of the key pieces of evidence: the credit report showing the ghost account, the mortgage refinance document linking Frank to the account number, and a sworn affidavit from me. The cover letter was polite but glacial. It stated that in response to his invoice, a copy of which was attached for reference, we had conducted a thorough audit of our shared financial history. This audit had uncovered certain discrepancies, detailed in the attached counter-invoice. It stated that all claims in his original invoice were hereby rejected. Furthermore, we demanded full payment of our counter-invoice within 15 business days. The letter concluded with a final, devastating paragraph. Should you choose to disregard this invoice, we will immediately forward our findings, including the contents of the file drawer marked KATHY in your garage, to the District Attorney's Office and the Internal Revenue Service for criminal investigation into felony identity theft, wire fraud, and tax evasion. We trust this will not be necessary and look forward to receiving your prompt payment. Sincerely, Evelyn Reed-esque. The package was sent via certified mail, requiring a signature upon delivery. I tracked it online. The day it was marked as delivered and signed for by F. Miller, I felt a strange sense of calm. The ball was no longer in my court. I hadn't just defended myself, I had taken control of the entire game. I had used his own transactional, mercenary logic against him. He wanted to do business? Fine, let's do business. The silence after the counter-invoice was delivered was absolute. For 3 days, I heard nothing. The angry voicemails stopped. Susan's harassing texts ceased. It was a tense, unnerving quiet, the kind of stillness that comes before a storm breaks. I spent those days in a state of high alert, my phone clutched in my hand, jumping at every notification. Liam did his best to keep me sane, taking me out for dinner and forcing me to talk about anything other than my father. On the 4th day, my phone rang. The caller ID was blocked. I took a deep breath and answered, putting it on speaker so Evelyn, who was on a conference call with me from her office, could hear. Kathy, the voice was gravelly, uncertain. It was Frank. It was the first time I'd heard him speak in 3 years, and the sound of it sent a jolt of ice through my veins. He didn't sound angry or aggressive. He sounded small. "What do you want, Frank?" I asked, my voice steady. There was a long pause. I could hear shallow breathing on the other end. "I got your letter from your lawyer." "I know," I said. "It was delivered 4 days ago." "This is a mistake," he stammered, his voice cracking. "A misunderstanding. That credit card, it was to help you, to build your credit history, so you'd have a good start in life." The lie was so pathetic, so transparently desperate, that I almost laughed. Evelyn gave a slight shake of her head on the video call, signaling me to stay calm. "Building my credit by buying yourself a fishing boat?" I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Interesting strategy, Frank. Did you also build my credit when you bought tires for your truck, or when you paid your bar tab?" He was silent. I could practically hear the gears grinding in his head as he tried to formulate another lie. "We need to talk about this," he said finally. "In person, just you and me, no lawyers, this is family business." "It stopped being family business when you sent me a bill for my own childhood," I shot back. "And it became a legal matter the moment my lawyer found evidence of a felony. We have nothing to talk about, Frank. You have an invoice. The payment terms are clearly stated. 15 business days." "I don't have that kind of money," he yelled, the desperation finally boiling over into anger. "You know I don't. You're trying to ruin me." "You seem to think I had over $500,000 just sitting around," I said calmly. "My invoice is for less than half of that, and unlike yours, mine is backed by evidence of a crime you actually committed. You didn't just try to ruin me, Frank. You stole from me. For years. You used my name, my identity, as your personal piggy bank." Suddenly, another voice came on the line. It was Susan, shrieking. "You ungrateful brat. After everything we did for you, we gave you a roof over your head, food on the table, and this is how you repay us, by trying to send your own father to prison." "You're right, Susan," I said, my voice turning to ice. "You did give me a roof over my head, and according to this invoice, you want to charge me $450 a month for 18 years for the privilege. So don't you dare talk to me about gratitude. This conversation is over. The deadline for payment is 11 days from now. If the funds are not in my lawyer's escrow account by then, the file goes to the DA. Have a nice day." I hung up the phone, my entire body trembling with adrenaline. It was done. The confrontation hadn't been a dramatic, face-to-face showdown, but a cold, clinical execution over the phone, and it had been far more satisfying. I had not screamed. I had not cried. I had stated facts. I had presented terms. I had treated them exactly as they had treated me, like a business adversary. The next week was a blur. Evelyn R. received a frantic call from a public defender that Frank and Susan had clearly just hired. The lawyer was blustering, threatening a lawsuit for extortion. Evelyn calmly replied that she would be happy to see him in court and reminded him that the discovery process would include a search warrant for her client's father's home, specifically for a certain filing cabinet. The lawyer's tone changed immediately. He said he would confer with his client. On the 10th day, the day before the deadline, Evelyn received a formal proposal. It was a settlement offer. Frank and Susan would agree to liquidate their retirement savings account and sell a small plot of land they owned upstate. The total would come to around $180,000. In exchange, they wanted the evidence destroyed and a non-disclosure agreement signed, preventing me from ever speaking about the matter again. I read the proposal in Evelyn's office. The money was tempting. It was a significant sum, but the NDA was what stuck in my throat. They wanted my silence. They wanted to bury this, just like they had buried the crime itself for all those years. They wanted to walk away with no public accountability, leaving me with a secret I had to keep for them. "What do you want to do, Kathy?" Evelyn asked gently. I thought about it for a long time. I thought about the humiliation of that first invoice. I thought about the cold dread of finding that ghost account. I thought about the years of feeling like I was never quite good enough for my father, and the final, crushing realization that my only value to him was monetary. "Counteroffer," I said, a new kind of clarity settling over me. "They give us the money. They also sign a document, legally notarized, relinquishing all parental rights and agreeing to a permanent no-contact order. They will never speak to me, write to me, or attempt to contact me or my business in any way for the rest of their lives. And there will be no NDA. I will not be silenced. This story is mine to tell. And they will sign a full confession of the identity theft to be held in trust by your firm. If they ever violate the no-contact order, that confession goes directly to the authorities. Those are my terms. Evelyn smiled. I'll draft the paperwork. They agreed to everything. They were that terrified. They chose their freedom over their pride. The final audit was complete. The closing of the accounts was an anticlimactic affair, handled entirely through lawyers. I never saw Frank or Susan again. The wire transfer for $180,000 appeared in my lawyer's escrow account on a Tuesday morning. The signed documents arrived by courier that afternoon. The confession, the relinquishment of parental rights, the permanent no-contact order. It was a stack of paper that effectively erased my father from my life. Holding those documents, I didn't feel the triumphant surge of victory I had expected. I didn't feel hatred or rage. I just felt quiet. It was the quiet of a storm that had finally passed, leaving a strange and unfamiliar landscape behind. The weight that had been pressing on my chest for a month, for a lifetime, really was gone. I could breathe. I met Liam for a drink that night at a quiet bar downtown. I told him everything. He listened intently, his expression a mixture of shock and pride. "So, what are you going to do with the money?" he asked after the bartender had refilled our glasses. It was a question I'd been pondering myself. The $180,000 was, in a very real sense, blood money. It was the price of my stolen childhood identity, the restitution for a father's betrayal. Keeping it for myself felt wrong. It felt tainted by the greed that had generated it in the first place. "I have an idea," I said, a plan beginning to form in my mind. A plan that felt right, that felt like the perfect final chapter to this whole sordid story. The next day, I called Evelyn. I instructed her to transfer the entire sum, minus her legal fees, into a new charitable foundation. I spent the next few weeks working with her to set it up. We called it the Phoenix Fund. Its mission was to provide grants and legal support to young adults who had been victims of familial identity theft and financial abuse. It would help them clean up their credit, fight back against their abusers, and get a fresh start. The kind of start I was lucky enough to have made for myself, and the kind Frank had actively tried to sabotage for me. The first grant we awarded was to a 19-year-old college student whose parents had taken out tens of thousands of dollars in student loans and credit cards in his name, ruining his credit before he even had a chance to build it. When I spoke to him on the phone, his voice thick with gratitude, I felt a sense of peace that no amount of money could have bought. I had taken the ugliest chapter of my life and transformed it into something positive, something that could help others escape similar nightmares. My life settled into a new normal. Terra threads continued to grow, and my work became my passion again, no longer overshadowed by the drama with my father. Sometimes, a memory of him would surface, a fleeting image of him teaching me to cast a fishing line or the smell of sawdust on his clothes. For a moment, a pang of sadness would hit me for the father I wished I'd had. But then I would remember the invoice, the cold calculation in his eyes, the shrieking entitlement of my stepmother. The sadness would fade, replaced by a calm certainty that I had made the right choice. I had closed the books on that part of my life. One evening, months later, I was browsing a local news site from my old hometown when I saw a small article. Frank and Susan Miller had sold their house and moved to a small retirement community in another state. The article mentioned Frank was a retired construction foreman. There was no mention of a successful daughter, no hint of the fortune they had tried to claim. They were just an anonymous, aging couple, starting over with diminished funds and, I imagined, a heavy dose of bitterness. They had gotten what they wanted, a quiet life free from prison. But they had paid for it with their dignity, their reputation, at least to me, and their son. I heard from Mark that he'd cut ties with them completely after learning the full story. I closed the laptop. I felt no satisfaction, no pity, nothing at all. They were just names on a screen, ghosts from a past that no longer belonged to me. I had taken their bill, a document designed to cripple and control me, and turned it into a weapon of my own liberation. I had faced the ugliest truth about my family and had not only survived, but thrived. My father tried to put a price on my life. In the end, I was the one who got to decide what I was worth. And I had decided I was priceless.